All right, so now let's get into the pro mode or manual camera mode on the Z Fold 6. First things first though, go into settings and then go to advanced picture options, and you can choose which format your pro mode pictures will come out in. So by default, you have JPEG, which is what the normal photo mode takes pictures in. And then you have RAW and JPEG formats and then RAW format. So the difference between RAW and JPEG is that a JPEG image coming out of this camera will be like a more developed image. It will have some effects applied to it. The phone's like algorithms and stuff will try to make the image look a little bit nicer, versus RAW is shooting like a raw image. So it's kind of what the camera sees is what you're gonna get in a raw photo. So there's less edits, there's more detail retained, and it just gives you a lot more freedom in terms of editing a photo afterwards in like Photoshop or a different photo editing software. So some people might want to have the option to edit a raw photo for more control afterwards, and also want JPEG, you know, like a fully developed image that you can just post on Instagram. So that's why there's a combination of the two. Before you start shooting on the pro mode, you could decide whether you want to have like JPEGs just to post them, use them quickly, or, you know, raw photos so that you can edit them a little bit more in depth. All right, so this is the pro mode. It's kind of like the other camera modes, except you have a lot more controls when it comes to your image. So let's start with ISO. So ISO is the sensitivity of the camera sensor and how it deals with light. So for example, if at a lower ISO, the sensor is less sensitive to light, which means that you're going to get a darker image overall. But then if you boost the ISO up, then the sensor is going to be more sensitive to light, which means that you're going to get a brighter image overall. But the thing to note about ISO is generally when you go to higher ISOs, you're going to have more noise and less detail in the image. At lower ISOs, you'll capture more detail and less noise. So generally you want to stay around the lower ISO if you want like the best quality for your image. But obviously, as you can see, at 50 ISO, the image is dark. So how do you deal with that? The way to deal with that is by using shutter speed. So shutter speed now is how long the camera stays open and absorbs light to create the image. So for example, imagine it like this. At, let's say, 1 second shutter speed, the camera sensor is going to open for 1 second and then close after that second, and that will be the light that it absorbs or draws in to use for the image. So if you increase that time, then it's going to stay open longer. But the longer that the sensor is open, the more light that is going to be absorbed and used in the image, and you're going to get super bright images. So for example, if I do like, honestly, I don't even have to do a lot to show you how overexposed it will be. So let's say like 4 seconds. So if I expose the image, that's another word that you can use for the shutter being open. So if I expose for 4 seconds, then you get an image like this, because 4 seconds of the shutter being open is way too much for all the light that is going on right now, all the light that I have in the room. So generally you want to balance your ISO and your shutter speed so that you can get the ideal image for yourself. So rule of thumb is like, if you're shooting indoors, then you want to be slightly higher ISO. So there's not like there's light sources, but the light sources are not amazing. Then you want to make your ISO around like, I would say like 300 to 600, 640. And then your shutter speed, it also depends on what your subject is. So I'll get a little bit more into shutter speed here. So shutter speed also, like I said, how long the shutter stays open and captures the image. So if you're shooting a faster subject, like let's say somebody's playing sports or something like that, they're running around, then you want to have a faster shutter speed. So the bigger fraction equals, you know, how fast the shutter will go. So this is like 1/1000 or 1,000th of a second. So super fast, basically. So I press the camera button, boom, it takes the image instantly because of how fast the shutter speed is. But obviously, because the shutter is staying open for a small amount of time, then you're not taking in that much light. So you want to balance your shutter speed and your ISO based on the lighting of the situation, the lighting of the area you're in, but also the subject. So if it's something like a flower, then I don't need the shutter speed to be super high to get a decent image. I just need to light up the image well. Like for example, this flower right here, I can probably go to like 640, and then shutter speed will be like 1/45 or something like that. And then boom, I take the image, and there you go. I think it's exposed pretty decently all around. But it all comes down to preference too. So some people might like to overexpose their images, some people like to underexpose their images. Generally, I think it's better to underexpose the image, which means to like allow the image to be slightly darker than you would want, because when you underexpose it, then you can increase the brightness and still retain detail. If you overexpose the image like this, then as you can see, there's like no details in the bright parts. All the detail is gone completely when you overexpose and there's too much light. So having less light is kind of better than having too much light because the information is still kind of there. There's more detail that is retained in the shadows versus in the light, if that makes sense. And then also, if you're not too sure about the ISO and the situation you're in, then put it on auto, and then you can adjust the shutter speed so that you can capture, whatever subject you're trying to capture. So for example, if you're taking pictures of kids and pets, like subjects that move around a lot, then I would say recommend starting at like 1/125. That's a decently fast shutter speed. I think it's like a good default to start at. And then, if you need to go a little bit faster to get them in focus or take a picture of them sharply, then you can go to like 1/180, and it's pretty instant, pretty fast to get a clear shot of like your kid or your pet. This is also a nice alternative to like using the default photo mode when you're trying to capture a picture of a moving subject, because a lot of people, they have issues with Samsung phones and taking like pictures of moving subjects. So if you go into pro mode, then you can adjust the shutter speed to allow you to take a faster image and get a pretty good looking image, in my opinion too. So yeah, you have that option in pro mode. Let's move on to EV. EV is like another way to adjust the light sensitivity. It's kind of like artificially darkening or lightening the image before you even take it. This is kind of helpful, like, because you can underexpose your image by default without even thinking about it, so that you can actually edit it afterwards and like increase the brightness and just the highlights and all that stuff without losing too much detail. So you can mess around with EV as you need it. But personally, I think ISO and shutter speed have you covered in pro mode. But sometimes, like if it's a really bright situation, I'll show you later on, you might have to do different things to bring down the light intake of the phone beyond its capability. Like as you can see, ISO only goes to 50, so sometimes you need to help the phone take in less light to get a good image. And then you have focus, so you can actually touch and hold this to adjust the focus manually. And basically, like you take your hand, put it in front of your face, you'll see that your eyes are focusing on your hand and everything behind your hand is blurred out. And that's basically what focus is. The camera can focus at different points in the shot that you're taking. So it can focus on the foreground or the middle or the background. And basically you adjust the focus so that your subject is either in focus or out of focus, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the image. So being able to manually control your focus is actually pretty powerful because you can do so many different things with it, and you can guarantee that your subject is in focus. And one thing that is cool on Samsung devices is that basically it shows you a green highlight of what is in focus, so you kind of know what is in focus beyond just like trying to see with your own eyes. I'm pretty sure that's called focus peaking. So if I zoom in slightly, just to give you a better example, if I adjust the focus, then as you can see, there's like a highlight around different parts of the image to show me where it's focusing. But yeah, you want to play around with focus and, get that right, because focus makes or breaks the image, in my opinion. And then you have like autofocus modes. So there's multi, where it kind of tries to capture everything in focus. And then there is center, where it prioritizes focusing on whatever is in the center of the shot. And then you have white balance. So white balance basically adjusts the color and temperature of the color based on this number right here. I believe this is like a Kelvin scale or whatever, and it goes up and down based on the temperature of colors. So you can adjust the white balance manually, or you can just leave it. Honestly, I just leave it on auto because I feel like the auto white balance is good enough most of the time. But if you feel like it's slightly off, like let's say the phone is reading warmer colors in the shot, when in real life it's actually cooler than it looks in the phone. So you can adjust the temperature here or the white balance to, make it a little bit cooler to be more neutral and natural looking. So yeah, that is basically how white balance works. It just affects the color, the temperature of the shot. And then at the top you have the same stuff. So you got your flash, you got your timer, then you got your aspect ratios, you got your 50 megapixel versus 12 megapixel mode, and all the same stuff applies to the 50 megapixel mode with like the controls, and then also zooming in and out. It's the same as the regular camera mode as well. And then you have this icon right here. You could tap this to change the light metering mode. Basically what that means is that it changes the way that the camera reads the light or assesses the light situation of, the different types of shots that you might be taking. So for example, if I'm taking a landscape shot, then it says that, matrix metering is the best because it accounts for the light of the whole situation, the whole shot, everything that's going to be in the image, and then tries to balance it out according to all of that. Whereas with spot metering, this is for like backlit. So like if I have my flower right here, and then let's say the window's behind it and there's a lot of light coming in from the window, then it will focus on the center and it'll try to make sure that the subject, the flower in the middle of the shot, is exposed well. And so it accounts for all the light around that subject. And then center weighted metering is basically for a bigger subject or a broader area, but still focusing kind of in the middle. So this, it says it's good for like portrait shots and stuff like that of people. These modes are just to adjust how the phone actually takes in the light and like adjust the image in its processing. Moving on to Pro Video, this is actually a mode that a lot of cameras or a lot of phones don't have. A lot of Android phones actually have, you know, a Pro Photo mode, but not a Pro Video mode. But basically it works exactly the same for most things, except you have a little bit more controls. So you can see that you got your mic controls. You can choose where the phone is prioritizing, you know, receiving the mic from. So Omni is all around, omnidirectional. And then you got front, so you're mainly recording audio from the front of the phone or like from the perspective of the person holding the phone. And then you got rear, which mainly records audio from behind the phone. So this is good for like controlling where the audio is coming from, and it helps with like a clearer sound, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your video. And then you also got some different options that are grayed out. This is one option that I use a lot. This is USB. So you can actually connect a mic to the USB-C port right here and use that mic with your Z Fold 6. So I use this a lot for my wireless mics that I have. And even with my USB mics, I connect them to my Z Fold 6 using a dongle like this. This is USB-A to USB-C. Then you can also use Bluetooth mics, so you can use your headphones or your earphones. So if you have Galaxy Buds, you can actually record with audio from them, or even AirPods if you connect your AirPods to this phone. And then there's Bluetooth mix. It's mixing the audio between the Bluetooth mic and the mics built into the phone. I've never tried that mode, so I'm interested to see how it performs. And then at the top, instead of the megapixels, you got different resolutions and shutter speed options. You have all the way from 720p up to 8K. This is just based on preference and what you're going for. Personally, I like to shoot in 4K always because I think 4K is just the best. But if you want to shoot at a higher frame rate, you can actually go to 120 in just regular HD 1080p, which is pretty cool. So now let me just talk a little bit about frame rates again, because this is different from like the shutter speed. So frame rate is like each frame that is captured in the video and how many frames per second. So right here, 24 is 24 frames are being captured in 1 second, 30, and then 60. Basically, these different frame rate options give you different kinds of effects to allow you to accomplish different things in video. So for example, 24 frames per second is going to look a little bit slower. It's going to look kind of laggy even to some people. But actually a lot of movies and films and TV shows use a 24 FPS frame rate because it looks more natural to the eye, more cinematic, versus something that is 60 FPS. 60 FPS is the fastest and commonly used for like things like reality TV shows or like, you know, action shows or action shots. You capture a lot more frames and that makes the image look smoother. And then you can also slow down the image because you're capturing double the amount of frames. So that's why you might use 60 FPS. But as you can see, 60 FPS actually takes in less light because it is faster and it's recording the frames faster. So there's less opportunity for light to come in. So if you want to capture more light, then you might want to consider a lower FPS option. But personally, I would just, especially in pro mode, I would choose the frame rate based on like what you're trying to accomplish and what kind of video you're filming. So if you're filming like action shots and you want to slow it down afterwards or something like that, then you would want to record at 60 frames per second or higher. And then if you're doing like something general, like you're vlogging or something like that, then I think 30 is probably the best compromise for that. It's a good all-around FPS. But if you're doing like something cinematic, then I would probably say like 24 FPS is the best way to get like a cinematic or like, you know, professional looking shot or something like that. But one thing to note though is when you're choosing your frames per second, you have to adjust your ISO and your shutter speed accordingly, mainly the shutter speed. So the general rule of thumb that I've learned, basically for your shutter speed, you want it to be double your frames per second. So I have 30 frames per second selected right here. So I want my shutter speed to be 60. And then you adjust your ISO accordingly to get, you know, a better lit situation, a better looking image. Having your shutter speed double the amount of your frames per second just allows the image to look as clean as possible. But if you want to experiment and mess around, you can definitely raise it up and, you know, give it like a interesting looking action type of vibe, or slow it down to give it like a trail of motion, ghosty type of vibe. So you can definitely adjust the shutter speed to whatever you want, but generally the shutter speed being double the frames per second is where you want to be at for like a clean and neutral looking image. One thing I didn't talk about in the pro photography mode is actually you have access to a histogram. So basically it's this little graph right here, and if you move the camera around, you can see that the graph changes based on what's in the shot. The idea is to use this graph to balance out the highlights and the lowlights. So the left side is going to be the lowlights. You can see it spike when I go on the black foam on the wall. But then if I go to the white part of the wall, the lighter parts, then you can see the right side is spiking. So generally you want to have like a balance of that. And you can use the histogram to kind of give you some information about how the highlights and the lowlights look in your image. If you learn how to use a histogram to your advantage, it can enhance the way that you record your videos and capture images and stuff like that.